Welcome back to proxying, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're not going to be looking at any, special rules or units or strategies or anything like that. But we're actually going to be going back to the basics and talking about how to start a Craftworld Eldar Army. And if you're like me, I made a lot of mistakes personally when I started. I didn't pick the right units. I didn't really read up on the rules. I didn't know my rules that well. And when I started years back, I had a lot of trouble with the faction. And I think, when I think back on it, I was told several times by several different players that I had played with before, don't start Eldar, you'll have a terrible time. They're really good if you can put hours and hours and hours and hours into them, but trust me, they're difficult. But I have to say, I loved the models. At the time, I really loved the look of them and stuff like that. So I decided to jump in anyway. And the first thing I picked up was a unit of Guardians, a Warwalker, and Eldrad Uthran. And I thought, I was pretty much going to have some smooth sailing from there. Well, let me tell you, I lost pretty much every game for about 4 months in a row. And even as I built up my army, I realized later how many mistakes I truly made when I started doing it and how much money I really wasted sinking into models that I never used again. That Warwalker that I told you about that I built, I had equipped it with the totally wrong weapons. And honestly, this was way back in the day when you had the old metal Warwalker. And to be honest with you, I rarely use that model pretty much ever again after that. So I think when new players are starting to, kind of decide if they want to play Craftworld Eldar or not, it could be a little tough because Eldar are not only a hard faction to play, but they have really specialized rules and synergies that a lot of new players jumping into it won't realize right away, and they might make a lot of mistakes buying units. And, of course, what I hope to do in this video and accomplish is if you are a new Eldar player, Craftworld Eldar player, you're thinking of starting a new Craftworld or something like that, and you watch this video and you leave it with a little bit more insight on how to create and start your army than when you left, then I will have done my job. I'll be happy. So to all you out there who are watching this video and who are thinking about starting Craftworld Eldar, and don't be intimidated by the faction. They are hard to play, but they're very rewarding when they're done right. And if you are patient with them, take your time, do your research with them, you will have a very fun time playing them. They're very different than other factions. They're not the same thing. Sometimes the problem is with Space Marines is that when a player wants to switch chapters, oftentimes they're just getting the same thing with slightly different rules. If you want to switch from Space Wolves to, Ultramarines, you're really only getting a slightly different variation of Space Marines, you know what I mean? And although GW has done a better job differentiating the different chapters, especially in this current edition, Eldar are completely different, completely new challenge, and to be honest with you, a load of fun. So many of you watching might be asking, well, where do I exactly begin with Craftworld Eldar? How do I start in the best way possible? And my advice to you would be, and I'm serious when I say this, and it sounds redundant and sounds obvious, but you start with the rules. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of players are attracted to aesthetics first. They will look at an army and say, oh, they look really cool. And then they will jump right into that faction without knowing any of the special rules or anything that the actual army does. And I think this is a mistake. And the reason why is because there's no longevity in it. If you only pick a faction because you think they look cool, and then you realize as you're playing them, man, these guys are boring. Man, I really don't like playing these guys. You're not going to stick with it. And in fact, your models are probably going to end up in a year or so on eBay for much less than you paid for them. So, I mean, unless you're, a very good painter or something like that, chances are your models are going to be on eBay for less than what it's worth. And you will have wasted a lot of your time and effort for something that probably wasn't that fun to you. So read the rules and kind of discover for yourself if the faction's for you. If you think the special rules are really cool and you love the psychic powers and you love the aspect warriors and things like that of the Craftworld Eldar, then by all means, this army's probably for you. If you don't, if you look at their special rules and you say, oh man, that seems really gimmicky, or I don't really like that, or man, these guys are really not tough, that's going to be kind of hard. I'm used to more, I want tougher units or something like that. Well, I mean, there are ways to make Eldar tough, but to be honest, in general, if you're having those doubts going into it by reading the rules, the army's probably not for you. And that's perfectly fine. Everyone has their own play style. Everyone, plays what they want to play. I've known players that won't touch Eldar, not in 1,000 years. And then I know players who love Eldar and they won't play anything else, So there's extremes and there's, players that will play anything and stuff like that. But you need to know what kind of player you are, and you need to know what kind of special rules you like and what you have fun with in general and stuff like that. So, the thing is about the rules is that a lot of players will say, well, why should I spend $50 on the codex right off the bat? I just want to start buying the models right away. Now, I understand that, but there's a lot of ways to get the rules for free before you actually start playing the game. So you can get free rules on Wahapedia. It's a big database online that basically has pretty up-to-date rules on almost every faction, including the Craftworld Eldar, and I've checked it out myself, and it's pretty accurate. It's accurate rules. I think they were missing like one thing, but I mean, it's irrelevant for the most part. Get a good idea of the rules so you can kind of start to understand whether or not you would want to actually play this faction. You can also go to your local hobby shop and pick up a codex, not to buy, but just to read. A lot of hobby shops, especially, honestly, even your local Games Workshop, if there's a Games Workshop around or that you have a local hobby shop that you guys play at, chances are they're going to have the Craftworld Eldar Codex, and chances are the manager or the store guy is going to let you read it for free, okay? And also, honestly, YouTube. There's a lot of great Eldar content out there. I mean, not just me. I mean, I'm probably not the greatest content, but to be honest, but there's a lot of fantastic content creators that do Craftworld Eldar related stuff. So check their channels out. Honestly, they're probably already, if you watch this video, they're probably already going to be automatically recommended. So there's a lot of ways to get access to the rules without spending a bunch of money on rule books and stuff like that. Now, once you've taken a good look at the rules, and don't just skim through it, really look at the rules and read the rules and see if it's something you enjoy. If you decide, wow, these are really cool, I can't wait to play these guys, then take a look at the different Craftworlds and pick one that you think would be really cool. Now, pick one that you think would be cool based on the rules of that Craftworld and kind of go based on that. What you don't want to do is just pick a Craftworld that you think looks cool or has a cool color scheme. The reason why is because, again, if you pick one that you like the color scheme for, let's say you like Samhain Craftworld because you like the color red, and you paint them up, all your guys up red and stuff like that, but then you realize, wow, actually, I really hate the units that I need to use to be good with Samhain. I don't really like Shining Spears or Wind Riders or anything like that. I would rather play Wraithguard. Well, guess what? You just kind of wasted a bunch of money on Shining Spears, Wind Riders, and stuff like that, and you're not enjoying playing them, and that's a waste of time. That's a waste of money. So pick a Craftworld that you like the special rules for, not that you like the color scheme for. Because guess what? You can paint, to be honest with you, it's not very fluffy, but you can paint your Iyanden army red if you wanted to. And you could just say that their paint scheme is different. It doesn't matter. Or in fact, you could use, and there's a little, in the far-flung Craftworld traits, there's actually a Craftworld trait that lets you copy the Craftworld traits of a pre-designed Craftworld like Beal-Tan or Samhain and just call it your own Craftworld. So you could just do that, so you don't really need to worry about the color schemes or anything like that. It doesn't really matter too much. But what does matter is the special rules, and each Craftworld has their own strengths and weaknesses and has units that are just better in that Craftworld. For example, Iandon. Straight up, Wraithguard and Wraithlords are better with that Craftworld than other Craftworlds. With Uthway, Guardians are actually pretty decent in an Uthway faction. Farseers and Warlocks are better in an Uthway faction. So you just need to kind of weigh up what special rules you like the best, and based on those special rules, decide which Craftworld you're going to pick, and then the cool thing about that is if you like the special rules that a certain Craftworld has, chances are you're going to really also like the units that work well with that Craftworld because they're going to benefit the most from those special rules. So it kind of goes hand in hand in a way, and honestly, in my opinion, is the best way to choose a Craftworld and a place to start. So, what's after that? So you've chosen a Craftworld. Let's say that you finally made your choice. You've looked at all the rules and stuff like that, and you're thinking of what to buy first. Now, what I would do first is, after you look at the rules, I would budget and plan out a 500-point list to purchase. And I might get in trouble for this, but I don't really care. Don't buy directly off the GW website, okay? GW charges way too much. There's lots of discounted stores out there on eBay. There's a lot of discounts on other places like Amazon, things like that. Especially eBay, by the way, has a lot of discount stores. Your local hobby shops that aren't GW might even have discounts on their GW products. So try to get your models from there. Trust me, it's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of hassle in the future. You don't want to have to spend more money than you have to. You want to keep your startup cost under about $200 because this way, if you really decide after starting, you can look at the rules and you can look at all that stuff. But if you're really not having fun with the faction after, maybe a couple months you're playing the faction, you're still not having fun with it. Hey, at least you didn't waste thousands of dollars on a 2,000-point army that you really ended up not liking. So keeping your costs low to begin with is really important because you can cut your losses very easily. And I'm somebody, honestly, I like to save money. I don't like to make wasteful purchases. If you're that kind of person like me, you don't want to make that big mistake and drop, thousands of dollars on something you don't use. And make purchases of models that you're going to use in larger games as well as smaller games. And the reason why is because you don't want to buy a unit that you're not going to use again for the entire time you're playing. So don't buy a unit of Guardians because Guardians are good in 500 points because you may not use those again in higher point games. Buy units you're going to use at every point level. And we'll go over that in a second. But the other thing is, don't glue your weapons yet. Either magnetize them or just leave them off for now. Because you won't fully have an idea of what weapons to give your models until you try out a few different combinations and a few different army lists and see what works for you the best. There's no right and wrong decision sometimes when it comes to special and heavy weapons. It all depends what you plan on bringing. All of them are pretty good in their own way. It just depends on what you need in your army list. So some of the purchases that you would most likely be making when you start are purchases like these that could be used in a lot of different lists. So things like a Farseer Skyrunner or an Autarch Skyrunner. Both of those models are going to be used in almost every single list that you have. I know for a fact that I use an Autarch Skyrunner and a Farseer Skyrunner in almost every list I run, regardless of what the Craftworld is. Not always the Autarch, but usually the Farseer Skyrunner is always a good pick. Rangers are always a good pick. I always have at least one unit of those in my army. They are definitely a must-have just because of all their cool rules and their ability to really play the objective game extremely well. Wraith Lords. Wraith Lords are very good support monsters, and honestly, they're very effective and very cost-effective. They're useful in a lot of different lists. Striking Scorpions, Warp Spiders, and Swooping Hawks are exceptional units that are pretty much the best in their class as far as fast attack and elite slots. The Fire Prism is another pretty good purchase. It's an absolute monster at killing vehicles and monstrous creatures. And because of the new Knights Codex that just came out, the new Terradence Codex that just came out, having a couple Fire Prisms in most of your lists is honestly very helpful for dealing with those new enemy types. Linked Fire ignores invulnerable saves. It's very powerful. Wraith Blades are another great choice for army lists, especially when you need a unit that can hold down an objective. Wraith Blades are very effective, especially the ones with the Ghost Axes and Force Shields. And basically, all of these units that I just mentioned are useful in a lot of different armies. And now, I'm not saying buy all of these units, obviously, but if you make a selection from these, they'll form a really good core to start from. All right, so here's a word of warning as well, because when people usually get into a new faction, they like to look at the Combat Patrol box, and they like to purchase that. Now, what I will say is for a lot of factions out there, the Combat Patrol box is really good because you're going to use all those units in the same army typically. But when it comes to Eldar, and when I look at this Combat Patrol box, what I see is units that you're never going to use in the same army in larger point games. And some players might disagree with me for this because a lot of players will be like, oh, well, you know, I use Wind Riders and Wraith Lords and Guardians all in the same list, and I have a Farseer and Foot in the same list, so it all works. And okay, well, that's true, and you've made it work for your army. But the problem is that when you're choosing a faction and you want to play a certain way, like for example, if you wanted to choose the Iandin Craftworld and you picked up this Combat Patrol box, I guarantee you are not going to use Guardians after 500 points. That is going to be a unit you're going to ship out or drop off for a Wraith unit or something like that. So it ends up being a waste of money. Same thing with Wind Riders. Iandin lists are never going to use Wind Riders. Biel-Tan lists are never going to use Wind Riders. So, unless you're honestly going to do something like an Uthway list with Wind Riders, because actually Wind Riders, it was brought to my attention by a subscriber that they are in fact Guardians, which I didn't know. I thought they had changed that. But they're still Guardians, so they, benefit from Black Guardians and all that stuff. So unless you're running an Uthway list that works well with Guardians, Wind Riders, and Wraith Lords, and Farseers, and you plan on using these models all the way up until 2,000 points because they're, they continue to be effective until that level, unless you're going to do that, I would skip out on the Combat Patrol box. I know it saves you technically a little bit of money, but the money you save is going to end up being wasted. And, GW is smart. They realize this. And they know that you will probably end up not using some of the units that you purchased in the Combat Patrol box when you get to bigger points. And GW does realize this, and they know that you will spend more money on other models to replace the Guardians that were in that Combat Patrol box or whatever else is not going to synergize with your particular Craftworld. So to save the most money, to be the most effective, and honestly to have the most fun and not feel like you're wasting money and time with this faction, you really want to plan out beforehand what you want to run and base your purchases on that. Don't base your purchases on the special boxes that GW puts together for you, okay? Honestly, in my mind, the only time you should ever purchase this box is if you plan on running a Uthway Craftworld. If you don't, you're going to be wasting money somewhere along the line, whether it be on the Wraith Lord. Wraith Lords are very good, but they're not good in every single list. The Guardians or the Wind Riders. if you're playing something other than Uthway, you're going to be wasting points somewhere, or excuse me, not points. You're going to be wasting dollars somewhere buying this box. So again, I mean, you know, it is a good box. I'm not dinging it. It does save you money in that way, but honestly, it's iffy because, you know, like I said, if you're not running Uthway, you're going to be kind of out of luck when you get to those higher point limits. So my advice, don't pick up the box until you're absolutely sure that you're going to be running an Uthway Craftworld. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm kind of go over some example 500 point lists that you might want to put together for a different Craftworld, and I'm going to explain why you're going to purchase some of the units for that base of 500 points. So our goal here is to keep under or around $200. Keep the list around 500 points, not really go over. And pick units that you're also going to use throughout the whole experience. So you're not going to buy a unit, use it for 500 points, and then not use it in a 2,000 point match. That's a waste of money. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to pick units that you're going to use, building all the way up to 2K. So the first one we have here is an Iandin Patrol Detachment, and basically we start out with a Farseer Skyrunner with Doom and Fortune. Okay, so basically just Farseer Skyrunner. And you can kind of customize his powers as you see fit, but in my opinion, Doom and Fortune probably the best with Iandin and Wraith units. We're going to have a Spirit Seer in the army. A Spirit Seer is very important for Iandin. They need it to function properly. A lot of their special abilities hinge on it. We're going to have 5 Rangers because you need troops in every single list, and Rangers are the premier troop choice in pretty much every single Craftworld. At least 1 or 2 units of them to secure objectives and generally just try to stay alive so that you can score on objectives. We have a choice here. We can either go with 5 Wraith Blades with Ghost Axe and Force Shield, really good for holding objectives, very tough. Or we could go with 2 Wraith Lords, and weapons may vary. Again, don't put on the weapons until you know what you're going to use with them and what kind of works best for your specific list. This will cost around the same amount of points as 5 Wraith Blades with Ghost Axe and Force Shield. So you can choose either one of these. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Oh my God, 2 Wraith Lords? That's so cheesy. I can't believe you would field this. To be honest with you, trust me, it's not only cost effective for you money-wise, but honestly, Wraith Lords aren't that OP anymore. They're not the OP Ultimate Destructors that they were back in 5th edition. Where if you were running 3 of them or 2 of them in a 500 point list, you were considered the ultimate, you know, cheesemonger of the hobby store. Okay, it's not exactly the same thing. There's a lot of weapons in 500 points that can easily deal with Wraith Lords now. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And plus, because it's so objective based now, Wraith Lords will have a little bit of trouble securing a lot of the objectives. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. 2 Wraith Lords is perfectly fair in my mind for this point level. And so for this Iandin Patrol Detachment, we will use every single unit that I've listed here for this 500 point detachment for 1,000 points, for 1,500 points, and for 2K. We're going to use it all the way up, so there's no wasted money here. The purchases that you make right here are going to be utilized throughout your entire Warhammer Eldar Craftworld experience, okay? So you don't really need to have models just sitting in your carrying case not being used in games. You can use every single model that you have purchased in your games because you have planned it accordingly from the beginning and were strategic about it and not wasteful. So this is our example of a 500 point list. Of course, you know, your experience might differ. Maybe you want to pick Wraithguard instead of Wraith Blades or whatever. That's up to you. But in general, this is kind of what you would want to start out with if you are choosing the Iandin Craftworld. So next up, we have Uthway. So as for the Uthway Craftworld, if you want to start out with a patrol detachment, it's actually perfectly fine to buy the combat box because you're going to end up using probably all those units if you do want to go with Wind Riders. If you don't want Wind Riders in your Uthway army, then it's better to not buy the combat box. Just depends on what you want. So we have a Farseer Skyrunner, Doom and Guide, pretty basic, pretty common in every list. 5 Rangers, which you will notice is a staple. So, and that's one of the other reasons I don't really like the combat box. They came out with new Rangers. Rangers are very good, but yet they didn't include them in the combat box. So a little bit disappointing. We have a Wraith Lord. Wraith Lords are very good with Uthway. That is also in the combat box. And then you could either go with 3 Shadow Weaver support weapons, 6 Wind Riders, or 10 Guardians. Now, the one thing I'll say about this is the support weapons can get kind of pricey, but you still should be under $200 with this setup. They're not that much more expensive than 6 Wind Riders, and you can probably get them on eBay or something like that for a little cheaper. So, again, this is a pretty basic Uthway starting point for a lot of players. Allows you to benefit from a lot of the stratagems and special rules that Uthway has to offer. And then we have Samhan. I think that's how you pronounce it. Again, Farseer Skyrunner. You'll notice a pattern here. We have 5 Rangers again. So those are the 2 core units you basically need for every Eldar list. A Farseer Skyrunner, in my opinion, and 5 Rangers. And we have 6 Shining Spears with this list and 6 Striking Scorpions. So basically what it is that Samhain is really good with close combat units. They get to reroll their charge distances, and they can charge and fall back in the same turn. That's their Craftworld trait. And they have a lot of cool abilities that allow you to, charge after advancing with units. So that's great on things like Shining Spears, who can advance 6 inches. So they can charge a very far distance and catch a lot of opponents unaware. So having Shining Spears and Striking Scorpions in your Samhain list is a very good idea. Some people might not want to do Striking Scorpions, but the thing about Samhain is you can't just have Shining Spears in your army. You have to branch out a little bit because you only really get 3 fast attack slots unless you want to pay extra command points for another detachment. So it's good to have elite choices that can also assault as well as Shining Spears. So on to the Alitok, I think they're pronounced. And they're a ranger-based faction, but actually you're not going to just have rangers in their army. They're also really good with support weapons because rangers have a lot of stratagems that help support weapons out, as do Shroud Runners. Because Shroud Runners can negate some of the cover of enemy units that they're close to. So what we have here is we have a Farseer Skyrunner with Doom and Guide. Now, you could easily switch this out in bigger points for an Autarch on foot or something like that to make use of their relic. But if you really want to go with a Litok, you're going to have to probably wait on that a little bit. The Farseer Skyrunner is going to give you a lot more mileage for the money you pay for it. And of course, we have 5 Rangers. We also have 5 Shroud Runners. So Shroud Runners are a very important part of a Latok's kind of repertoire of units. They're very good with this Craftworld, obviously. They benefit a lot from their special abilities and so forth. So Shroud Runners are, a pretty obvious choice for this. And we also have 2 D-Cannon support weapons, and if you wanted to, you could probably easily switch the D-Cannon support weapons out for something else. But I went ahead and put them in there because you can make use of the Resonator Shard ability, which, to be honest with you, is a very vital part of playing this Craftworld at higher points. You're going to need it. So I went ahead and put 2 D-Cannons in there. And the great thing about support weapons with a Latok is basically your movement can't be modified in any way. So because they are still a Craftworld unit, you can move these guys in terrain that would normally hinder their movement, and they can move at full speed. So these guys are actually not that unmobile. I know it seems like they're, probably pretty immobile, but they're actually not that immobile compared to other factions because they don't suffer the movement penalties when moving through certain terrain types. So this gives you a pretty good ability to kind of do a lot of damage to infantry with your Shroud Runners, Rangers. You have Doom and Guide, which can really put the hurt on bigger targets. And you have 2 D-cannon support weapons, which are really good at taking out tanks and things like that. Typically with D-cannons, you use them as a defensive weapon for your other units. So the thing about Alatok is they like to stay away from the enemy. They like to hit and run. And you can do this and then bait your enemy into coming in closer to try to catch your units. And that's when you can spring your trap, so to speak, and hit them with the D-cannons, which are a fairly short-ranged weapon at 24, but they hit like absolute trucks. So this is a pretty good starting point. Now, for the D-cannon support weapons, I recommend magnetizing these for Shadow Weavers, because sometimes you will need Shadow Weavers, and depending on what you like, I mean, you may not like D-cannons. And if that's the case, then you can go ahead and go with the alternative, which is the Shadow Weaver for less points, but also less anti-tank and killing power in general. So it's a really good starting place for an Alatic Craftworld to start out. You got Rangers, you got Shroud Runners, you have your support weapons to make use of your different stratagems and so forth. And you have your Farseer Skyrunner, who is going to allow you to do more damage than the basic unit profiles suggest. And next up, we have the Biel-Tan, probably one of the most iconic Craftworlds. And we have a Farseer Skyrunner again with Doom and Guide. We have 5 Rangers, just like always. And with this Craftworld, you really want to focus on Aspect Warriors. So you're either going to go with 6 Swooping Hawks or Warp Spiders for your fast attack slot. This could easily be switched out for Striking Scorpions if you wanted to. It's really up to you what you want to go in 500 points, but my suggestion for lower point games like this is actually to go with Swooping Hawks or Warp Spiders. I think they'll give you more mileage because they'll give you a little bit more objective control, and you'll be able to kind of hit and run much easier from the enemy. Striking Scorpions tend to get locked down in smaller games and destroyed. And then we have a Fire Prism. So Fire Prism is absolutely amazing with Biel-Tan because of their Craftworld trait, which allows 1 reroll to hit per unit. And this makes the Fire Prism much more deadly, and in bigger points, you're going to be running multiple prisms, and the linked fire stratagem is going to be really good at basically taking out big stuff with invulnerable saves, things that your Fire Dragons may not be able to actually do by themselves. If you choose to take Fire Dragons, which I do recommend in bigger point games, at least 1 unit of them, because they are very effective tank hunters. But this gives you kind of a good starting point for Biel-Tan. It allows you to make use of a lot of the different specific stratagems that target Aspect Warriors in your army and things like that. And to be honest with you, any Aspect Warrior unit, in my opinion, works for this points limit. But I would choose one that probably has something like, Sudden Assault or Advanced Positions or something like that, like Striking Scorpions or Swooping Hawks or Warp Spiders, just so you can get used to the hang of those rules because you're going to be using these units later anyway. All right, so where do you go from there? So let's say that you purchase, kind of a 500-point army of your select Craftworld, and you're playing games and you're having fun, and maybe you're not winning all of them, but you're really learning the rules and you're enjoying your time with them. So after this happens, you'll kind of know which units you like, and you can build onto your army accordingly. But also at the same time, stick to the strengths of your Craftworld. And also, please do not be afraid to use proxy models before you buy additional units. I can't stress this enough. I can't tell you the amount of times I went out and I bought another unit only to realize that that unit had absolutely no synergy with my army and that I kind of wasted my money on it and I ended up not fielding them again. This has happened to me so many times I can't even count. I've wasted so much money on this throughout the years. Please don't be me. Please proxy your models before you actually buy additional units when adding onto your army. So, for example, let's say that you wanted to upgrade to 1,000 points. Your gaming group usually plays larger games and is asking you, hey, when are you going to, purchase more models? If you want to scale up to 1,000 or 1,500 points, don't go out and drop $300 on new models that are not tested. Try them out first as proxies. Ask your gaming group, hey, can I use some proxies in a few games so that I know what models to buy? I'm sure they'll be more than happy to let you. And as long as they are, height and base comparable, so that means the base sizes of the models and the height of the models is comparable. I actually have a video on how to make proxies the right way on my YouTube channel. You can go ahead and look that video up real quick. It just basically means that you have to, kind of use toothpicks or something else to designate the approximate height of the model for line of sight purposes. And the base size has to be pretty much the same as what the unit would normally be on. And this is just to avoid any rules, conflicts, or anything like that. So try them out as proxies first before you buy so that you know if you'll like them in that army or not. So let's take that Samhain army, for example. Let's say that you wanted to pick up some Wind Riders, but you weren't sure if you wanted Wind Riders or you wanted Shining Spears. Well, proxy both and see what works better for you in that list. And maybe you come to the realization that, you don't really like Wind Riders in the Samhain army because they're not really that assault-based and they don't benefit that much off of a lot of the Craftworld traits. Or maybe, you think that Shining Spears on the opposite end, you think that Shining Spears, having 2 units of them is maybe too much and you're not able to manage it properly. And you think maybe it's too many points or whatever and you want a cheaper option. So either way, if you proxy it beforehand, you'll know for sure what you want to buy so that you can make an informed decision about it. And what this will do is it'll save you a ton of time, building and painting the models. It'll save you a ton of money because these models are very expensive. $300 is nothing to laugh at. I mean, for some people it's nothing, but for a lot of us hobbyists, we have other stuff, we have bills, we have whatever you guys got going on in your lives. And it's going to save you a lot of frustration in the actual games where, you just don't like playing with the units that you purchased. So, in conclusion, I think here's the thing. When you're starting a new army, always start small and do your research beforehand. Don't impulse buy. Don't invest all at once in 2,000 points. I've seen so many players do this. I knew a guy who invested probably about $1,000 in a 1,500 point army of Dark Eldar. He played for 4 weeks and then decided that he hated them because he wasn't really winning a lot. Now, if any of you have ever played Dark Eldar, and probably not, maybe there's a couple of you out there who've played Dark Eldar or do play Dark Eldar, they are a very hard army to play. Okay, they're very high skill cap. They're kind of like playing Ezreal, I guess, in League of Legends, if you know what I'm talking about, right? Very hit and run, very fragile. So he didn't have a good time with them, but the reason why he didn't have a good time is because he impulse bought them. And he didn't do his research beforehand to find out that they were a very high skill cap faction that was also very fragile. So, and he didn't like that. And he sold his army and said that, in fact, they were too squishy for him and he didn't like that. So please do your research and put some thought into it first. Build up your army slowly and don't be afraid to use proxies and experiment with a few different options before going all in on something. Because to be honest with you, it could be a big waste of time and an even bigger waste of money, and it can frustrate you, I mean, that's frustrating. Playing games with an army that you don't care for. Trust me, I've proxied plenty of different armies. I do this every time I try to play a new army now. If I want to get into a new faction, I proxy it first to see if I'm really into the rules. I study it. And then, you know what? Honestly, most of the time, I feel like, well, this is kind of fun, but I like Eldar better. So why buy a new army when I enjoy playing my Eldar better? There's just no purpose to that, right? So really do your research beforehand to prevent that kind of frustration and, don't waste your own time, basically. Okay, everybody, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. I know this is kind of different than our usual videos. Tomorrow I have a tier list coming out. We're going to be covering elites, Craftworld Eldar elites. So I'll see you in the next video, guys. Have a good one, everybody. Hope you guys learned something in the video, and peace out.